Welcome to First UU. My name is Lindsay Pyle Pittman. I use she, her pronouns. I am a early 30s, chubby, brown-haired girl. And let us begin by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Ni Yu Konska people, known sometimes by the name Osage. The descendants of the people who were forcibly removed from this land by colonists make up the Osage Nation. We acknowledge their struggle, continued struggle for justice.
Hi, I'm Babs. I'm a middle-aged femme person, and I'm wearing earrings today, which is very unusual. So, wearing a blue shirt and some necklaces. Pardon me. Our chalice lighting words this morning come from Betts Winnecke, pardon me. May this flame, symbol of transformation since time began, fire our curiosity, strengthen our wills, and sustain our courage as we seek what is good within us and around us.
Good morning. I'm Becky C. I've got our opening words for this morning. On Speaking Queerly in Public by M. Jade Kaiser. Every time the word gay rolls off my tongue, when the words queer or intersex or trans or non-binary or bisexual bless my lips, no matter what I'm talking about, I am also always sending a love letter, casting a lifeline, praying a prayer, and yes, obviously, waving a flag. So many generations of silence and slurs, of words of violence, and of quiet, lonely, does anyone else in the world feel this way? My heart could burst every time I speak the imperfect but earnest attempts at finding ways to communicate lineages of us. Every word, a reaching toward each other, a you're not alone, or a we got each other, and a isn't it divine being this way? It's never too early to start teaching this love language and planting these seeds of assurance. Just thinking about it makes me want to sing the whole queer lexicon to the tune of ABCs to every newborn baby. Asexual, bisexual, cubs, and dykes. Train a child up in the way they should go, says the scriptures. And I want them all to go queerly, go freely, go in belonging. I want us to raise a whole generation of kids who never learned to hate themselves, or to treat others like monsters, or that there's anyone even God is against. This is indeed part of my queer agenda, to expose children as early as possible to all the possibilities of their beautiful becoming, to leave no doubt that whichever way their love blossoms and their gender blooms and their body unfurls, they will be protected, cherished, celebrated, loved. In the world as it is, to even begin to balance out all the messages otherwise, these things cannot be said enough. So we say them in every form they take across languages and cultures. We say them as early and as often as we can. We say them especially when they're not welcome. We say them with all the love we've got, and we will never, never stop. Our hymn for the month of March is Love Will Guide Us. It's number 131 in the gray hymnal. I invite you now to rise in body or spirit to sing.
Good morning. My name is AJ Fox. I use she and they pronouns. I am the Director of Religious Education here at First UU. And I'm wearing a lot of yellow today. And intermittently, I am fully joining in with the children because I had like an injury on my foot this week. So I'm just keep taking off my shoes and wandering around only in socks in the church. And it feels very like, for those of you that don't know, I grew up here. I definitely wandered around in socks in this building a lot as a child, and it feels very like back to my roots to remind myself to put shoes on before I come in the sanctuary. Yeah. 1987, that was me. If you don't have one of these sheets yet, or if you're not sitting next to someone with one of these sheets, feel free to reach or raise your hand. And Marilyn's going to pass them out to you. And then I want you to take just a second and remember that one of the reasons that we are here and celebrating today is because we are entering spring, and spring is around us, and spring means change and transformation and rebirth of the natural world. And so I'm going to ask us to do a reading together. But first, I want you to know you don't need to do all of these. I want you to just pick like a few animals that speak to you right this moment. Okay, so our list, or I guess not animals, a few natural wonders that speak to you. And we're going to practice them all together. But then during the reading, think, you know, I am a squirrel today, or I really feel kind of grass today, right? So keep that in mind. Okay, so the first animal is a squirrel. And the sound, if you could all help me so that it's not just me doing all these sounds alone, that would be so rad. Squirrel. So you all have in front of you, squirrels go. All right, and a sparrow goes chip, 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 chip. And then a mouse or mice go squeak, 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 squeak. And then a frog goes, ribbit, ribbit, nope. All right. And then a frog, what's a baby frog? And tadpoles, according to this, go, which I assume is a ribbit, but like underwater. You know, I give you creative freedom. Grass goes. And the pond goes blip, blop, blip, blop. The peepers go beep, beep, beep. The nighthawk goes scream, scream. And then the daffodils. I didn't write this, just to be really clear. I just like it. But the daffodils, you have to have like a head movement probably. It says like a nodding head and maybe a little doo, because they're like trumpets, right? All right, so pick in yourself, think, what am I bringing to spring today? Right? And then pick a few of those. You don't have to, the whole room doesn't have to do every single one, but like, you know, it can be joyful. All right, so I'm gonna read slow and I'm gonna try to be obvious when we get to ones, but if I am not obvious, just go ahead and do it anyway, because it means I missed the word. This comes from, by the way, Unitarian Universalist Christy Johnson, so not me. It wasn't a particularly hard winter that year, but it was long and dreary and colorless. No wonder then that when the first winds of March blew warm breath back across the land and the land began to green, the wild creatures on 4 feet and 2 feet and wing took notice. The first creature, small brown mouse, sat back on her haunches and smelled the warm air. She knew what this meant. The green time was coming and the first small shoots of grass, which tasted so very good, would begin to show themselves. Ah, sighed the little brown mouse. Tender grass to nibble on and to line my nest for my babies. The small brown mouse was not the only creature glad to smell spring in the air. The fuzzy-tailed squirrel scampered to and fro, up and down the trees. He paused a moment to watch a sparrow and her mate work on their nest. Mrs. Sparrow wanted to line the nest with soft lint and grass in a particular way. Mr. Sparrow was working hard and flew off and hid behind a daffodil. Which was nodding in the breeze. Fuzzy-tailed squirrel shook his tail and scampered off. And he remembered a spot where he had hidden a particularly juicy horse chestnut, and he hoped that little brown mouse had not found it. High overhead, nighthawk surveyed the land. His favorite, hold on. Would you like me to hold you or you like to go, Veronica? Okay. His favorite tree was still there, and his neighbor, fuzzy-tailed squirrel, was there too. He passed his winters far to the south, but he was always glad to return to his home. No, we're reading. The trees were all fuzzy and green with baby leaves, and the flowering trees were bright with colored petals, and over there were the daffodils. waving and nodding to him. Can you do your daffodil? Daffodil. The warm spring sun shone down upon the land, upon the grass that glowed with green vigor, upon the little brown mouse. Cheep, 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 cheep. As he put the finishing touches on her next and upon the daffodils. No, no. You can go downstairs with Veronica to the wiggle room, or you can hold still. Which one? Wiggle room? Or help with the story? Okay. Veronica, can you take me? Y'all are incredibly patient. The sun gave warmth to the wings of the nighthawk. Squeak! As he soared upon the wind and beamed upon the sparrow family as they worked a bit more cooperatively this time on their nest. The sun gleamed at the fuzzy-tailed squirrel as he scampered about, and it even glittered upon the pond far below. Down in the deep quiet of the pond, where the water never quite froze, even in the deep midwinter, the warmth of the sun began to heat the water until suddenly the frogs popped out of their winter mud. Tadpoles began to swim in the sun-warmed pond, and they dreamed of jumping high into the air to see the grass at the edge of their world. The peepers joined the chorus, and the pond added music to the colors of spring. And there, in the musical, colorful world where the grass was green and the daffodils nodded in the breeze, where the frogs and tadpoles and peepers dreamed and swam in the waters of the pond, and where the fuzzy-tailed squirrels scampered in the trees as the nighthawk settled into his tree where the sun shone down. The little brown mouse had her babies. The sparrows laid 4 eggs, and what had been the promise of spring became the fulfillment of it. Thank you, friends, and thank you for your continued patience.
Good morning. I'm Reverend Michelle Scott-Huffman. My pronouns are she, her. I am a middle-aged, but later middle-aged than Babs, woman with short spiky hair and glasses, wearing a suit of some color that I can't identify, with a black turtleneck, in a look that Era has named business goth. So thank you. And I apologize in advance that this is not going to be nearly as much fun as what AJ just did. So if I were standing in a pulpit in a Christian church this morning, as I sometimes do, I might begin by proclaiming Christ is risen, and everyone else would likely respond with Christ is risen indeed. As it turns out, I'm here in this pulpit. And if I started my message by proclaiming Christ is risen, many of you would likely respond with something like, have you lost your mind? Do you know where you are? So I won't do that. But it's Easter, and we are a church with historical roots in radically different understandings of Christian scriptures and doctrine than what is often seen as traditional or mainstream. And in a month that we've talked a lot about Ramadan and Oli, because they too were happening this month, it would be, as I've said before, nothing short of avoidance to not talk about Easter today, on the actual day of its occurrence. And as you all know, I'm trying really hard to bury and not resurrect my own tendencies toward avoidance. So, all of that to say, happy Easter, friends. Today, I'm going to say words like Jesus and resurrection and atonement. For those of us who have experienced religious trauma associated with Christians and Christianity, I totally understand if that doesn't work for you. And if you would rather hole up in another room sharing coffee and conversation with others, there's a nice table in my office across that hallway. But if you think you might have the spoons for it, I can say that I believe what you'll hear today will be vastly different from what you've heard in the past, and may just offer some tidbit that allows for a little bit of healing. Each of the Gospels tells the Easter story a little differently. But the one in the Gospel called Mark is the oldest and the shortest. So we'll read that one today. Mark chapter 16, verses 1 through 8 from the New Revised Standard Version. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Salome, brought spices so that they might go and anoint him being Jesus, who had died on the cross of Rome 2 days earlier and was said to have been placed in a borrowed tomb. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him, but go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. And that ends the reading from Mark's Gospel. Okay, so buckle your proverbial seatbelts, because I really only talk about the Bible here a couple of times a year, and I have a rather extensive and expensive education in it, so there's a lot to say. So yes, Mark is the oldest gospel, even though it's not the first gospel in the canon as we know it. The books in the New Testament were arranged theologically and not chronologically. And Mark is the oldest gospel by several decades. Side note, you may not know the letters of Paul are older than any of the gospels. Mark's gospel, which we call Mark's gospel, even though we know almost indisputably that the gospels were not actually written by the followers of Jesus whose names are on them, is the shortest of the four and mentions neither a virgin birth or any birth at all, nor any encounters with a resurrected Jesus. As you might imagine, a Jesus story that starts with an adult Jesus and ends with a missing body and followers scared into silence would have been less than ideal for the development of a new religious community. Later redactors tried to fix part of this by adding some text at the end of Mark's Gospel, which became verses 9 through 19 in some versions, such as the King James Version and the Latin Vulgate, from which many other translations emerged. My point here is that the story continues to evolve as the community forms and grows. You might remember the quote from last week that humans are meaning-making machines. And there is no shortage of meaning being made about who Jesus was and what the stories of his life, death, and resurrection meant. In fact, the writer of the third gospel, who we call Luke, begins their gospel by saying, "Since many have undertaken to compile a narrative about the events that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed on to us, by those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and servants of the word, I too decided, as one having a grasp of everything from the start, to write a well-ordered account. Almost as if that writer knew that the story that they were going to tell would be different, perhaps even contradictory to those already told, much to the dismay of the protectors of the myth of a single story. Something else has evolved over time, and that is the many interpretations about the meanings of all the different parts of the story of Jesus. One cannot make sense of the Christian scriptures without the context of the religious and cultural setting in which Christianity was born. Jesus was Jewish in word and practice, and though he was a reformer, he never denounced the faith of his ancestors. So when we hear language like Jesus was the lamb that was slain, it's helpful to remind ourselves of what came before. So the Levitical law found in the book of Leviticus, a favorite of lots of people for many reasons, specifically chapter 16 talks about the Day of Atonement, saying Aaron is to offer the bull for his own sin to make atonement for himself and his household. Then he is to take 2 goats and present them before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting. He is to cast lots for the 2 goats, 1 lot for the Lord and the other for the scapegoat. The scapegoat was to have the sins of the people ritually placed on it and then be sent out into the wilderness with a man who would accompany the goat to a remote place and then ritually release all wickedness and rebellion. As the text says, into the wilderness where the goat would escape, hence a scapegoat. This was a part of the process of ritual purification before the Lord. Scholars refer to this as the scapegoat mechanism. And it would have been on the minds of the people who were left to make sense of the death of Jesus, who they had come to understand as the Messiah, who would save them from the violence and oppression that they were experiencing. They were left to make meaning of the loss of this person who they thought were going to lead them into a whole different experience of living as a people. Humans are meaning-making machines. So throughout Christian history, there have been many attempts at meaning-making in the form of atonement theories as it relates to Jesus. This too is a whole level of Bible geekery that we don't have time for today. So I'm just going to fly through some of the most well-known with far more simplification than should ever be allowed. I'm using descriptions written by blogger Mark Hackett because he has a gift of brevity and I do not. So number 1, thought to be the oldest and taught by Origen in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, the ransom theory holds that Adam and Eve sold their souls to Satan in the Garden of Eden, and that somebody had to pay a ransom to Satan to save us all. Number 2, recapitulation theory, first proposed by Irenaeus around probably 180. This theory suggests that Jesus is the second Adam and came to earth to redo the human story, which was marred by the sin of the first Adam. Number 3, satisfaction theory. Articulated by the medieval theologian Anselm of Canterbury, this theory states that human beings have sinned against God and offended God's honor. The sacrificial death of Jesus is the ultimate act of obedience that restores God's honor. Number 4, moral influence theory. Articulated by the medieval theologian Peter Abelard, this theory emphasizes the moral and transformative power of Jesus Christ's life and teachings as the means by which humanity is reconciled with God. It suggests that the primary purpose of the cross was not to satisfy divine justice or appease God's wrath, but to show mankind the fullness of God's love, resulting in softened hearts, repentance, and righteousness. Number 5, penal substitutionary atonement theory. is the dominant theory that came out of the Protestant Reformation and still holds significant sway in Western Protestantism today. The idea is that Jesus took upon himself the penalty that humanity deserved for sin and satisfied the demands of divine justice. Reformers like Luther and Calvin argued that God's justice required punishment for sin, and that this punishment could only be satisfied by the death of a perfect and sinless sacrifice. Number 6, Christus Victor theory. This theory is gaining popularity in several Christian traditions. According to Christus Victor, the death and resurrection of Jesus was a confrontation with a victory over the powers of evil, freeing humanity from bondage. Jesus liberates humanity from the power of sin and death through his own sacrificial death and triumphant resurrection, inaugurating a new era of salvation and redemption. This is developed by Swedish theologian Gustav Ahlin, with the claim that his theory was upheld by early church fathers in their writings, but later misinterpreted by proponents of ransom theory. And number 7, the scapegoat theory. This is a newer theory of Christian atonement that stands apart from most others in that it shifts the blame for the violence we see on the cross from God to humans. Developed by French polymath René Girard, scapegoat theory argues that human violence is the result of mimetic desire, which is the tendency of individuals to imitate the desires and actions of others. This leads to violence as individuals compete for objects of desire. Girard shows how societies throughout human history have selected scapegoats, a person or group who is blamed for all the problems and conflicts within the community, to focus their violence on as a means to prevent more widespread communal violence that might impact them. The scapegoat is then expelled, punished, or even killed in order to restore unity and order. Okay, so are we ready for a quiz on atonement theories? Yes, okay. So Father Richard Rohr, speaking of the scapegoat mechanism, writes, the central message of Jesus on love of enemies, forgiveness, and care for those at the bottom was supposed to make scapegoating virtually impossible and unthinkable. Many Christians, with utter irony, worshiped Jesus the scapegoat on Sundays, and then on the other 6 days of the week made scapegoats of Jews, Muslims, other Christian denominations, heretics, pagans, the poor, and almost anybody who was not like themselves. Scapegoating depends upon a rather sophisticated but easily learned ability to compartmentalize, to separate, to divide the world into the pure and impure. The religious genius of Jesus, he says, is that he utterly refuses all debt codes, purity codes, and the searching for sinners. He refuses to divide the world into the pure and the impure, much to the chagrin of almost everybody then and now. Scapegoating is rampant in our world, and particularly in these United States. There is no shortage of available scapegoats: the poor and unsheltered, immigrants and refugees, and people of every minoritized identity. In addition to being Easter, today is Transgender Day of Visibility. I would be remiss if I did not make explicit the connection between the practice of scapegoating and the current treatment of trans and non-binary people in our schools, workplaces, religious spaces, and communities in general. Scapegoating is alive and well. The good news is that there are forces for good that refuse to leave us stuck in that place and continue to advocate for life in community where we work together for the full inclusion of every person, where we face difficulty honestly and graciously refusing to put all of our stuff on any one person or any one group and to expel them from the community as if that will somehow solve the problems of being human together. And so on this Easter, Whether it's your story or not, I invite you to lean into the story of death and new life, the story of refusal of systems of dominance, the story of not being able to keep someone down, and how that person that is done away with by the system, by the powers that be, will continue to rise up, even if that person in body can't rise up anymore, that we rise up as a community, that we are resurrected together in a way that continues to bring life. I'll close by recalling part of the opening words read earlier in honor of Trans Day of Visibility by M. Jade Kaiser. I want us to raise a whole generation of kids who never learn to hate themselves or to treat others like monsters, or that there's even anyone God is against. This is indeed a part of my queer agenda, to expose children as early as possible to all the possibilities of their beautiful becoming, to leave no doubt that whichever way their love blossoms and their gender blooms and their body unfurls, that they will be protected, cherished, celebrated, and loved. In the world as it is, to even begin to balance out all the messages otherwise, these things cannot be said enough. And that, my friends, is a resurrection story. A story that says the system can't keep any group of people down. And so, in remembrance of an ancient myth that denounced a system of scapegoating, may we all leave this place today in the deep knowledge that we too are protected, cherished, celebrated, and loved. Happy Easter. Out of the ashes of death, new life springs forth. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.